So how did you get on that deer? In which I'll have you show it to the people that are watching on the video side here in a minute, but it's an absolutely just stupid big deer. Like yeah, we were talking about scoring it before you got on there, and it was like I wouldn't even know how to score it because it's got basically two beams that on each side.
Yeah.
But it's
So
crazy.
I accidentally filmed that deer in May. We bought a new like full frame camera to help do media for the expo, the podcast, the whole nine. We figured it was time to ditch the cell phones and start doing like upper echelon quality stuff as best we could. So I thought, well, there's nothing better than going out and practicing with it on deer, in ag fields and stuff like that. So I thought, well, I'll go to a place where I know I can glass and stuff where I hunt and, see a few deer. Well, I had some deer at like 350 yards away. I could just tell that they looked big, but they didn't have any racks that you could see from there. So I'm filming them. I got home and put my SD card in and blew it up in DaVinci. And I looked at my father-in-law. I'm like, what the hell's going on this deer's head? It's splitting everywhere. Like he had his bases and probably, we'll say 5 or 6 inches of antler base, high. And I thought, God, that thing's going to be just the nastiest looking monster. Who knows what that deer's going to do come July and August. So I prefer scrapes. I love finding the right scrape. I don't like just any scrape. And when you find the right scrape, you get pictures on them all year long. And it's better than any corn pile most people have hunted. They're daylight and everything close to bed. So I have all these other deer on camera all year long. And I never had that deer on camera. And I thought, well, maybe that was one of those cases where a buck just decided to travel from far away or whatever. And that's why I saw him. Just a chance in a million kind of thing. Well, I ended up going scouting after I missed that deer. I was in a pretty bad funk. Had it all on film and everything. Did everything right. Was just to that point, my finest moment when it came to scouting, both e-scouting and then in person. And it was really like pressure forced me to be aggressive with that deer. And after I missed him, I was just in a funk. So I thought, you know what? We'll take our bow, but today we're not worried about getting in a tree. Like if we have the opportunity, we'll get in a tree, but we're going to go find something today. And we're not going to be satisfied with anything less than phenomenal. And so I'm scouting my way through, and I hit this secondary ridge, and from the bottom nearly to the top is a red oak grove, and it is just raining acorns. It is crazy. And what blew my mind is here we are in mid-October when the deer should be pounding white oaks. And I mean, it's some of the better feed sign that I've seen in early season. I mean, the leaves were just chopped to hell. Acorn caps, crushed acorn shells everywhere. I was blowing deer out of there, and they kept coming back. And so as I'm creeping up this secondary ridge, I get to the edge of the red oak grove, and I looked up and I saw a lone beech tree with like 6 branches that are probably 4.5, 5 feet off the ground. And I just thought, oh shit. I had hairs standing up on the back of my neck, man. I was like, I think I know what's going on here. And I walked like 10 yards closer, and I saw just a huge bare spot under it, and then a signpost rub. And I'm like, God, okay, let's get in a tree and we'll put a camera up when we leave. We'll go ahead and sit this one out. I saw does and a young buck. Didn't see anything. I stick that camera up. Nothing even worth showing a little kid showed up for a couple of days. And then I had a young buck, probably a 2-year-old, hit the licking branch in daylight on that Friday. And then later that night, that big one hit it. And so I get this picture notification when I wake up and I look at it, and it's kind of blurry. So I thought, well, I wonder if that's the deer that I was targeting, because I was targeting a pretty high and tight buck anyway. That was probably in the 150-inch range. Could be 148, could be 153. I really don't know. Well, I send a video request. I use the Moultrie Mobile Edge one. So I had to send a video request. And of course, nothing walks in front of the camera for hours. So I have to wait until like 1 p.m. And finally I get, the daily test pick it sends, and that sends everything else through. And the video came through and I freaked out. I was like, oh my God, I have an absolute mega on my camera. And so I sent it to a couple of buddies, and they did the same thing. Like, they freaked out. And they're like, man, you got to target him. I'm like, you ain't got to tell me. So it was very interesting, though, because I threw a couple sits at him and never did really see him. I also never had a daylight video or pic of that deer ever, other than when I filmed him in May. I never even got close. I think the closest I got was like 4 a.m. But I picked him up about 200 yards away on another scrape. And that's what really kind of told me how far he was, where he was traveling and kind of what he was doing. And I threw my last sit at him the night before I killed him. And I had found a ladder stand on the private that wasn't there when I had set that camera up. And I thought, damn, man, like, he's definitely avoiding that. And that's kind of what forced me to get basically in between the pressure. And I had found a scrape about a week earlier that was close to where I picked him up again on camera. And I went in to check it that Saturday afternoon, and it was wide open, had big tracks in it. There were buckeye trees just mangled, snapped in half, you name it. And I thought, well, this is probably him with that thick, tight rack. And I got in a tree, and I think I got set up like probably an hour and a half before the thermals started to switch. And when they started to switch, I had a couple does drop down off of one of the secondary ridges and come in. And then 30 minutes later, you felt everything kind of stabilize, and just the constant light breeze coming down the hill right in your face. And he dropped right down and Jay hooked that scrape, and I shot him at 13 yards. I couldn't even see him until he got under some honeysuckle. I was 8 feet high, and I drew my bow without even knowing what it was that was coming in. But I just had that feeling, and I didn't want to not have my bow drawn and have him show up. And of course it was him, and I shot him, and probably the most unique kill shot you could ever put on a deer. I misread the angle, basically hit him in between the shoulder and the body on his left shoulder, and it never entered the cavity. It went in between the shoulder and the body, went down the rib cage, and then came out and poked him in the back leg and came out. But I severed the brachial artery in the shoulder, and it's like an unreal blood trail, but they do stay alive for a little while. He actually, after I shot him, he ran about 60 yards and turned around and blew at me, and did it again later. And so I thought, oh my God, like, did you screw this up? And then my arrow had nothing on it, and it's like a white fletching kind of arrow. So I'm like, what have you done? Like, I watched the arrow disappear. What happened? And then I started tracking where he ran, and Stevie Wonder could have followed that blood trail. So I backed out that night, came back the next day, because I was on the edge of private, and I'd push that deer, but I don't want to push him onto private because if somebody tells you no, I mean, you'd basically have to break the law to go get him if you were going to go get him, and I can't do that. So I backed out and found him probably 40 yards from the private. So really, really, really lucky there.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like that is absolutely wild. And a couple things. When you said you found this scrape, like, and you said he dropped down, were you on the secondary ridge, or were you down in draw in a hub, or like what were you?
I was down in a flat that, so basically, I would call it like interior edge. So there were a bunch of really big, like red oaks and white oaks. I think it was an old fence row or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything else. So these trees are probably like 40 to 60 feet. Like they're big, big trees. And then the rest of them, there's a bunch of honeysuckle, a bunch of, what do you call that? Hackberry and buckeyes that are anywhere from 6 feet to 15. So there was like a sub canopy.
Yeah.
And so you really couldn't get high up at all. So I literally put a one stick on a tree that put me at 7.5 feet. And then I went another foot or so with I put a beast stand up and, sat there and killed him at like 8.5 feet. So it was wicked.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool. And what was the date on that?
I shot him November 4th.
Okay.
Yeah. So
do you want to pick up the rack and
yeah.
and show people? Oh man. And I apologize to anybody that's listening to the audio version, but you might want to look on YouTube because this thing is so cool. Just absolute giant of a deer. Man. And you were saying, like, with the way they measured it, like the G2s were like 17 inches.
Yeah, so it had a 17.25 inch G2 because they wouldn't count it as, they don't do like an actual extra beam. Mm-hmm. And then he had like a 10 and a 9 inch base, I believe, but I didn't get credit for that